He stood still, eyes forward, hands tight behind his back. The air was tense, but the royal guard did not move an inch, even when the foreign officer barked at him like a street dog. "Salute me now," the officer shouted, loud enough for the marble walls of the embassy to catch an echo. But the guard said nothing, did nothing. And within the next 3 minutes, what happened in that embassy would turn into the most talked about incident in international circles, and the truth behind the silence would break hearts across the globe. Before we go deeper into what really happened that day, do not forget to subscribe. This is not just a story. This is a real reminder of dignity, sacrifice, and the power of silence when the world demands noise. He was not just a man in uniform. He was the last remaining member of an ancient order of guards that had served the royal family for over 6 centuries. They were trained in loyalty, silence, and endurance. And most importantly, they were taught to bow to no one except the crown. But the foreign officer that day, he did not know that. He had just arrived from a powerful allied nation, one that gave orders, not took them. In his world, rank was power, and he believed every man should bend to it. The royal guard's silence was not just defiance, it was law. But to the officer, it looked like rebellion. That is when he stepped forward, his shiny foreign medals jingling on his chest. He got close. Too close. Close enough to whisper something that would make the other embassy staff freeze in place. "You think you are better than me? You think your silence makes you a man?" For a moment, no one breathed. The air got heavy. The guard's face did not change, but something in his eyes flickered. Not fear. Not pride. Something deeper. The kind of pain that has no sound. And then, he finally spoke. But what he said was not what anyone expected. His voice, calm and steady, cut through the room like a blade through silk. And just like that, everything began to fall apart. The guard's lips parted, and every person in the room leaned forward without meaning to. Even the officer's smirk faded, just a little. "I was ordered to salute only one man," the guard said softly, "and he died protecting this embassy while your country watched from the sidelines." Silence. Not a word moved through the room. The officer blinked, caught off guard. This was not the script he was expecting. He opened his mouth to respond, but the guard was not done. "That man was my brother." The words landed like a slap. A few staff members exchanged nervous glances. The air turned heavy, like the walls themselves were listening. No one had ever heard the guard speak before. Not once. Not even during flag ceremonies. And now this confession, this quiet storm, it left the room trembling. The officer chuckled nervously. "Look, I do not know what happened in the past, but Exactly. The guard interrupted, his voice still calm. "You do not know. You just gave an order, thinking I would jump to it. But this uniform was not stitched to follow voices. It was stitched in the blood of loyalty, not ego." He did not yell. He did not need to. The officer's face changed. Not anger. Not shame. Confusion. As if for the first time, he realized this was not some ceremonial show. This was not a tourist photo op. This was a man standing on bones. And then, slowly, the guard reached inside his coat. A small envelope, yellowed at the edges. He held it out toward the officer. "What is this?" the officer asked, hesitant. "A letter your general wrote," the guard said. "After my brother was shot protecting your men. You gave him a medal. We gave him a grave." The officer took the envelope with shaking hands. And just like that, curiosity turned into fear. What was inside that letter would break him. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. The officer stared at it like it might explode. Around him, the embassy staff stood frozen. No phones, no whispers, just silent eyes bouncing between the guard and the man who suddenly looked too small in his own shoes. He finally opened it. The paper was old. Faded ink, typed in a rush. But the words, they stabbed. Sergeant Harold Mason gave his life shielding foreign diplomats during the Eastern Compound breach. We regret to inform his family that while his actions saved lives, the political climate prevents us from awarding him full honors at this time. We extend our gratitude and apologize for any delay in recognition. The officer's lips moved slowly as he read, silently mouthing every word. When he finished, he looked up. The letter trembled in his hand. His eyes had changed, not softened, not guilt-ridden, just broken, as if some illusion had cracked inside him. He started, but nothing followed. The guard stepped forward, just slightly. Not aggressive, not proud. Just present. "You came into this place with your voice raised, your chest out, and your rank like it was armor," he said. "But you did not check the floor you were standing on. My brother died here, right behind that marble column. The officer turned. Behind him stood a plain white column, unmarked. Innocent. But as his eyes traveled downward, he noticed a thin metal line etched into the base. Barely visible unless you looked closely. He knelt to inspect it, and there, engraved in barely their letters, was a name. Harold Mason, Royal Guard. Fallen in silence. Defender of peace. The officer's face twisted. Embarrassment. Regret. Fear. They all fought for space. His voice cracked when he spoke again. No one told me. They were not supposed to, the guard replied. This place teaches dignity in silence, not history through humiliation. A tear hung at the corner of the officer's eye, not because he was weak, but because for the first time, he felt what it meant to be truly out of place, not by rank, but by purpose. And in that moment, he stood up and did something no one expected. He saluted the guard. The room gasped. It was quiet, but it was real. A foreign officer, a decorated figure from one of the world's most powerful nations, saluting a silent royal guard in his own embassy. The cameras were not rolling. There were no press people watching, no politicians to impress. It was raw. It was personal. And it was long overdue. But the guard did not salute back. He just stood there, still as stone, eyes locked onto the man in front of him. And then, almost gently, he said, "You do not salute a ghost unless you mean it." The officer dropped his arm. There was no anger in his face now, only realization. The kind that sinks deep, the kind that takes months to understand fully. He glanced at the paper in his hand again, then folded it, and returned it to the envelope with slow respect. "I want to make this right," he said, voice trembling. The guard's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with the weariness of someone who had heard promises before. "How?" he asked, one brow raised. The officer looked around. He saw the marble floor, the plain column, the staff still standing stiff like statues, unsure whether they were witnessing history or standing in a graveyard of forgotten loyalty. "I will get your brother the honor he was denied," he said. "Full military recognition, proper ceremony, international apology, if I have to." The guard stepped forward. "Only once. You were too late for honor." That was for him. The officer looked confused again. "But there is something you can do," the guard added. The room leaned in, metaphorically. Even the silence felt heavier now. "What is it?" the officer asked. The guard's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as steel. "Let every man who wears a uniform know that a loud voice means nothing. Loyalty does not march to ego. It listens to pain. If you want to honor him, teach your men that silence is not weakness. It is strength, trained not to scream." And for a moment, the foreign officer could not speak. Not because he had no answer, because he had no right to one. The air grew still. The embassy, once echoing with commands and chatter, now felt more like a sanctuary than a political post. The officer lowered his head, not out of shame, but in respect. The kind of respect that could not be ordered, only earned. "I will remember this," he said quietly. "No," the guard replied. "You will not. Not unless it costs you something." That sentence landed like a punch to the chest. The foreign officer looked up again, this time with something new in his eyes. Guilt had turned to reflection. Pride had begun to melt into humility. He stood there, unsure of what to say. Unsure of how to stand at all in the presence of a man who never raised his voice, but moved the earth under his feet. Suddenly, a young aide from the embassy stepped forward. Barely out of his 20s, his voice cracked when he spoke. "Sir, if I may, I had no idea this column meant something. I have walked past it every day." His voice caught. "I am sorry." The guard looked at him, and this time, he nodded. "It is not your fault," he said. "But it is your responsibility now." The aide swallowed hard. That sentence hit deeper than any reprimand. Because responsibility lives longer than guilt. The officer turned to the embassy staff. "From this day forward, this will be recognized as a memorial site," he said. "Every new diplomat, every officer, every visitor, they will know the name Harold Mason." There was a long pause. The guard gave one small nod. But just when it seemed like the story had ended, the officer looked again at the guard, eyes narrowing slightly. "You said he was the last man you were ordered to salute. What did you mean by that?" The guard went quiet. And then, without blinking, he said something that no one in that room would ever forget. "He was not just my brother. He was my commander. I gave up rank to serve under him in silence. After he died, I swore I would never raise my hand again unless I saw his spirit in the man standing before me." The room fell into a silence so deep You could hear breath shaking. And the foreign officer knew instantly he had not earned that salute. The officer's shoulders dropped, and for the first time since he entered that embassy, he looked small. Not weak, just human. The kind of human who had finally come face to face with something bigger than himself. Not a gun, not a threat, but truth. Pure, unshakable truth. I do not deserve your respect, he said, voice low. But I will earn it. Not with medals. Not with speeches. I will make sure your brother is remembered beyond this embassy. His name will not be whispered anymore. It will be spoken with honor. The guard did not smile. He did not nod. He simply looked him in the eye, as if measuring the weight of those words against every broken promise he had heard before. But then, slowly, he stepped to the side. For the first time, he said, "You may pass." It was not permission. It was recognition. The officer walked forward, quiet, every step now feeling heavier than the medals on his chest. As he neared the doors, something caught his eye, a young child standing at the corner of the embassy with his mother, both of them staring at the guard. The boy pointed, "Mama, why does he not move like the others?" His mother whispered back, "Because some people guard more than doors. They guard stories." The officer heard that, and it broke something inside him in the best way. Outside, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the embassy walls. But inside, something had already changed. The silence that once felt cold now felt sacred. The same marble floor where blood had once spilled now carried a different weight, memory, meaning. As the foreign officer reached the gates, he turned back one last time. The guard was still there, still silent, still unmoved, but somehow standing taller than anyone he had ever known. The embassy gates closed behind the officer, but the weight of what had just happened clung to him like armor made of memory. He did not head straight to his car. Instead, he paused at the edge of the road, looking back at the building as if trying to hold onto something invisible, something sacred he was afraid to forget. That night, he returned to his quarters and opened a laptop. No staff, no speechwriters, just him and a blinking cursor. For the first time in years, he began writing something not out of duty, but from conscience. It started with one line. "A royal guard taught me today what rank never could. Silence speaks when pride fails." He wrote deep into the night. A full report, but not the usual kind. No strategic updates, no diplomacy babble. Instead, he wrote a story, a testimony, a confession of how a single man, without raising a hand or voice, had taught him what medals, drills, and wars had never managed to explain. Honor is not about being seen. It is about never needing to be. That report would be passed up the chain, quietly but powerfully. One general read it, then another, and soon, a decision was made. 2 weeks later, a ceremony was announced, not in a public square, not for political points, but in the embassy's courtyard. Small, silent, surrounded by the marble columns that had heard more truth than most courtrooms. The guard was called, but he refused to stand at the center. Instead, he watched from the shadow of the same pillar that had once hidden his brother's final breath. As a plaque was placed beneath it, the boy who once asked, "Why does he not move?" stood beside his mother again, this time holding a small bouquet of white roses. The plaque read, "In memory of Harold Mason, a guard who never shouted, but protected the world from its own noise." The ceremony ended without applause. Just silence. The kind of silence that meant everything had finally been said. Weeks passed, but the echo of that day never truly faded. Something subtle had changed within the embassy staff. People walked differently now, slower, more aware. The young aide who once apologized began leaving a single rose under the pillar each Monday morning. No one asked him to. No one ever mentioned it. But the gesture lived on. As for the guard, he remained as he always had. Still, composed, silent. But now, every time a new diplomat entered the embassy, they were briefed not just on rules and protocols, but on him. On the man who stood like a statue, yet carried the soul of a kingdom. They were told that he once gave up rank for something greater than recognition, and that even the most powerful officer from a foreign land had to learn humility at his feet. One morning, as winter crept in and the courtyard trees began to shed their final leaves, the foreign officer returned. No convoy, no suit, just a folded military jacket under one arm, and in his other hand, a thin wooden frame. He approached the guard slowly. The staff watched from inside the windows, hushed. When the officer stopped in front of him, he said nothing at first. Then, quietly, he held up the frame. Inside was an official military certificate. signed, sealed, and marked with the golden stamp of honor. It read, "Posthumously awarded, Sergeant Harold Mason for valor beyond duty and silence beyond measure. Recognition by Allied Command, International Defense Council." The guard's eyes did not move, but his fingers did. He reached out and took the frame. For the first time in over a decade, he accepted something with his own hand. Then, without a word, he placed the frame beneath the pillar. He stepped back, eyes forward. The officer turned to leave, but just as he did, something happened that no one expected. The guard raised his right hand and saluted, not to the officer, not to the crowd, but to the column. And the boy watching whispered, he waited all these years, just for that. That salute, it lasted only 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds froze the entire world inside the courtyard. No one moved. No one blinked. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself refused to interrupt the moment. The guard's arm lowered slowly. His face stayed still, but something deep inside him had shifted. For years, he had stood there carrying weight most men would collapse under. Not just his duty, not just grief, but the unbearable silence of being forgotten, of watching history pass by the sacrifice of someone who had once been his blood and his commander. But now, something sacred had been returned. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. The officer stood behind him, silent. He did not speak because he finally understood. Some victories are not meant to be celebrated. They are meant to be respected. Later that evening, the embassy lights glowed low. The hallways, once echoing with heels and whispers, now carried a softer energy, almost reverent. The photo of Harold Mason, recently restored, now hung inside the East Corridor. Underneath it, a single quote had been engraved in simple, honest words. He died quiet, but he lived louder than all of us. Back in the guard's private quarters, a small room with no mirror, no decorations. He took off his gloves and sat for the first time that day. He stared at his own hands, rough and steady. The same hands that had once caught his brother's body before it hit the floor. The same hands that had carried the memory of that day for years in complete silence. He placed them on his knees and breathed. One long, deep breath. For the first time, it did not carry weight. It carried peace. Outside his window, snow had begun to fall. Soft, gentle, covering everything in white. And as the embassy lights dimmed, a single lantern remained glowing above the pillar outside, burning not just for Harold Mason, but for every silent guard who ever stood tall in the shadow of forgotten valor. Years passed. Ambassadors came and went. Policies shifted. Flags changed. But the pillar, it remained. Untouched. Unspoken. Sacred. Every now and then, someone new would ask, who was he? The one they talk about in hushed tones? And someone older, someone who remembered, would simply reply, he was the kind of man you salute, even if you do not know why. The guard grew older too. Slower. But he never missed a day. Rain. Snow. Political tension. It did not matter. His post was not a job. It was a promise. And then, one spring morning, he was gone. No announcement. No parade. Just an empty space where dignity used to stand. But in his place, a bronze statue appeared months later. No inscription. Just a figure, hand behind his back, eyes forward, facing the pillar. Silent. Eternal. People still visit that spot. They say it feels different from the rest of the embassy. Still. Heavy. Holy. Because stories like his do not end. They echo. Through every salute. Through every silence. Through every generation that learns the meaning of honor, not through words, but through the quiet courage of standing still when the world demands you kneel. Military Medal. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for the forgotten heroes. The ones who never asked to be remembered, but deserve to be. Because silence is not weakness. Sometimes, it is the loudest thing in the room.